Welcome back to the Deep Dive, everybody. Today, we're tackling something, well, pretty fascinating, actually. It all started with you, our amazing listeners. You sent us this document, AI, Core Principles for Social Behavior, and we're really excited to dig into it.
Yeah, this one's juicy.
It really is. The big question here is, how do we define good behavior? It's a concept we all wrestle with as humans, but it gets even more complicated when we think about teaching AI to be good.
Right. And we've all had those moments where, you're like, wait, was that okay to do or say? The rules can be so slippery.
Totally. This document argues that trying to create a single rule book for good behavior is basically impossible. And it's for some pretty compelling reasons.
Yeah, it dives right in, actually. It doesn't mess around. It lays out these three, core reasons why a universal social rule book just won't work. And honestly, they make a lot of sense.
Okay, so first up, context. It seems obvious, but the document really drives home the point that where you are, who you're with, all of that totally changes what's considered appropriate.
For sure. Imagine you're at a football game, everyone's shouting, cheering. It's part of the fun.
Exactly. But try that in a library. Oops. Big no-no.
Huge difference. And it's not just about place, right? It's about the relationships, too. I can tease my brother mercilessly.
Oh, I bet.
But I wouldn't try that with, say, my boss. The same words, totally different impact depending on who's involved.
It's all about that dynamic, yeah.
Yeah.
Think about what you wear. Pajamas at home, comfy, no problem. Pajamas to a wedding, not so much.
Exactly. Context is king. It's the setting, the relationships, that's what gives meaning to our actions,
Makes sense. And then there's the second big hurdle, cultural differences. This one is so fascinating to me. What's perfectly polite in one culture can be a huge faux pas in another. The document gives some really good examples. Eye contact, for instance. In the U.S., we're kind of taught to look people in the eye. It's a sign of honesty, but...
Right. But in some cultures, it can be seen as, a challenge or disrespectful, especially with someone older or in a position of authority.
It's the underlying intention might be the same, showing you're engaged, but the way you show it is completely different.
Totally. Personal space is another one. Some cultures are all about standing close, touching while you talk, that kind of thing. Other cultures, way more distance.
Yeah. I'm someone who likes their space, so I have to be mindful of that when I'm traveling.
Yeah, it's important, right, being sensitive to those differences.
For sure. And the document mentions the thumbs up gesture. I never really thought about this before. I thought it was pretty universal, a positive thing.
Oh, yeah. Except... not everywhere. Apparently, in some parts of the world, it's a seriously offensive gesture.
It's mind-blowing. And then there's the whole thing about time. In some cultures, being exactly on time is super important. In others, it's way more fluid. And that can lead to some interesting situations.
Absolutely. And this is exactly why this idea of a one-size-fits-all rule book for social behavior it's a non-starter.
It's whose rules do you even use? It gets messy really fast.
Yeah. Which brings us to this document's big point. It's not about specific rules. It's about underlying principles.
Okay, that's intriguing. So instead of saying always do this or never do that.
Exactly. It's about the deeper values, the ideas that guide good behavior.
And the third point the document brings up, before we get into those principles, is that people change. Right? What's expected of a 5-year-old is different from what's expected of a 25-year-old.
Oh, for sure. Huge difference. A tantrum from a toddler. Well, toddler's gonna toddler.
Right. It's developmentally appropriate, But an adult having a meltdown in the cereal aisle, not so much.
Not so much. And it's the same with, responsibility. We don't expect a 5-year-old to be balancing a checkbook.
Nope. Chores, maybe.
Yeah.
Checkbook, not so much.
Right. But as we get older, those expectations change. And even our understanding of abstract concepts like fairness, that evolves too. A kid might think fair means everyone gets the same amount no matter what.
Yeah. Equal cookies for all.
Exactly. But as adults, we realize fairness is way more complex than that. It's about equity, considering everyone's circumstances.
So, okay, I'm getting it. You can't have a rule that works for everyone at every age, in every situation. It just wouldn't make sense.
Exactly. So this document says, focus on the principles. The principles are what stay consistent, even as the ways we express them change.
Okay, I'm ready to dive into those principles. What's the first one?
So the first one is respect for others. Basically recognizing that every person has value, has dignity. And it's so interesting to see how that plays out depending on who you are, where you are, all of that.
Yeah, give me some examples.
Okay, so for a little kid, Respect might be not interrupting when someone's talking. For a teenager, it might be about not spreading rumors online, cyberbullying.
And for an adult?
In the workplace, it could be listening to your coworkers' ideas, valuing their contributions, even if you don't agree. And it's also about using the right pronouns for people, challenging those harmful gender stereotypes that are out there.
I love that, because respect looks different in different contexts, right? Like respect on public transport is, well, maybe it's offering your seat to someone who needs it more.
Exactly. Or being mindful of noise levels.
And even across cultures, respect can be shown in so many different ways, like bowing in some cultures or being super formal in your language.
It's about adapting, right, understanding those nuances, but the underlying principle is the same.
Okay, I'm with you. What's the next principle?
Honesty and integrity. This is about being truthful, acting in line with your values. It's how we build trust.
Okay, yeah, that's crucial. How does that look in practice?
Well, for a little kid, it might be owning up to a mistake, even when they're scared of getting in trouble. For a teenager, it could be about not cheating in school.
And for adults?
It's about being honest in your business dealings or in your relationships, admitting when you've messed up.
Yeah, that's tough sometimes.
It is, but important. And the document mentions that while some cultures might have different ideas about how direct you should be, the basic idea of keeping your word, of being reliable, that seems pretty universal.
Makes sense. What's next on the list?
Kindness and compassion, showing care for others, wanting to ease their suffering. It's about empathy, really.
Okay, I love this one.
Me too. It can be so simple, right? Like a kid sharing their toys with a friend who's sad, a teenager standing up for someone being bullied.
And for adults?
Volunteering your time to a cause you care about, helping a neighbor in need, donating to a charity.
And it's important to remember that kindness and compassion are for everyone. It shouldn't be limited by those old gender roles that say men can't be caring or women always have to be the nurturers.
For sure, it's for everyone. And while the ways we express kindness might differ across cultures, that basic human desire to connect, to support each other, that seems to be pretty widespread.
Okay, so that's 3 principles down. What's next?
The next one is responsibility and accountability. Owning your actions, doing what you say you'll do, and accepting the consequences.
That sounds like a tough one.
It can be, but it's essential, right? It's about building trust, being reliable. For a kid, it might be cleaning up their toys without being asked.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
For teenagers.
Maybe it's turning in their homework on time.
And for adults.
Meeting deadlines at work, paying bills on time, taking care of your responsibilities.
Yeah, adulting is hard.
Tell me about it. And this principle applies to everyone, regardless of gender. Sharing chores at home, that's a big one. Not letting one person shoulder all the burden.
Absolutely. And responsibility goes beyond our personal lives, right? It's about our impact on the environment, our roles as citizens.
Totally. And apologizing when we've messed up, owning our mistakes, it's all part of being accountable.
Makes sense. All right, what's the next principle on our list?
This one is super important. It's fairness and justice.
Okay, that's a big one.
It really is. Treating people fairly, fighting against discrimination and prejudice. It's about doing what's right. For a kid, that might be learning to take turns in a game.
Or sharing, right? Those are big lessons when you're little.
They are. For a teenager, it could be about speaking up against unfair rules at school or in their community.
And for adults.
It's about making unbiased decisions, advocating for equal opportunities, challenging systems that are rigged against certain groups.
And that definitely includes fighting for gender equality, making sure all genders have equal rights and opportunities.
Absolutely. And it can show up in so many areas of life, in the legal system, in social interactions, even within families. The document points out that what's considered a fair outcome might vary a bit across cultures, but the core idea of rejecting prejudice, of striving for equity, that's a powerful shared value.
All right, I'm taking notes. What's the next principle?
Nonviolence and peacefulness. This is about, well, pretty much what it sounds like. Avoiding harmful force, working towards peaceful solutions.
Okay, so starting with the basics, like teaching kids not to hit.
Exactly. And as kids get older, it's about learning to manage conflicts constructively, talking things out instead of resorting to aggression.
And for adults.
It's about really committing to nonviolence in every aspect of life. Approaching conflicts with the goal of finding a peaceful resolution, working to de-escalate situations, not make them worse.
And that applies to all genders, right? Like, it's crucial to speak out against domestic violence, against any form of violent targeted at a specific gender.
For sure. It's about building a culture of peace, and that means teaching those skills early on, showing kids healthy ways to resolve conflict.
And the document mentions this principle in relation to online interactions too, right? Cyberbullying is a huge problem.
Absolutely. It's about fostering respectful communication, even in the digital world. And while there might be some cultural variation in what's considered an aggressive act, the fundamental idea of avoiding harm, of seeking peace, those are pretty universal goals.
Okay, what's our next principle?
Respectful communication. Engaging with others in a way that's clear, considerate, and involves active listening.
Okay, I can get behind that.
Right. It starts early, like with a kid learning to listen when someone's talking to them. For teenagers, it might be about learning to disagree respectfully, to express their opinions without being hurtful.
And for adults.
It's about being clear in your communication, both at work and in your personal life, and being mindful of those gender dynamics that can creep in, making sure everyone's voice is heard.
Yeah, that's so important. And respectful communication can look really different depending on the situation.
Yeah.
Like a professional email is going to be different from a chat with your friends.
Totally. And it gets even more complex when you're communicating across cultures. You have to be aware of those different communication styles, the nuances of language, to make sure everyone feels respected and understood.
Makes sense. All right, what's next?
Self-respect and self-care. This one is all about recognizing your own worth, taking care of your well-being.
Oh, I like this one.
Me too. It's so important. It starts with those basic things, right? Like a kid learning to brush their teeth and wash their hands. For teenagers, it could be about finding a balance between school and their social life, managing their stress levels.
And for adults.
It's about setting boundaries, making time for the things that bring you joy, taking care of your physical and mental health. And it's important to challenge those societal messages that tell us we have to sacrifice our well-being for others, or that asking for help is a sign of weakness.
Yes, so important.
And this applies to everyone, regardless of gender. We all deserve self-care. And while the specific ways we practice self-care might be influenced by our cultures, that basic human need to feel good, to take care of ourselves, that's universal.
I'm on board with this one. What's next?
All right, we're getting close to the end. This one is open-mindedness and willingness to learn. Basically, being open to new ideas, new experiences, and recognizing that you don't know everything.
Humility is good.
So good. So for a kid, this might look like trying new foods or being willing to play a new game even if they're not sure about it at first.
And for teenagers.
It could be about listening to different viewpoints even if they challenge their own beliefs, really engaging in those tough conversations.
And for adults.
It's about lifelong learning, staying curious, being open to new information, even if it means changing your mind about something.
Yeah, that can be hard.
It can be, but it's how we grow, right? And it's especially important to be open to learning about the experiences of people who are different from us, especially when it comes to gender. We have so much to learn from each other.
Absolutely. And this principle, I think it's essential in so many areas of life. In school, when you're traveling, in any kind of meaningful discussion. And while different cultures might have different attitudes towards change and tradition, that basic human ability to learn and adapt, well, it's pretty crucial for navigating a world that's constantly evolving.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, last one, right. What's the final principle?
Gratitude, appreciating the good things in your life, and expressing thanks for what you have.
Oh, I like this one. It's simple but powerful.
Right. And it can be such a small thing. A kid saying thank you for a present, a teenager acknowledging the support of their friends and family.
And for adults.
It's about taking time to appreciate the things we often take for granted. A good meal, a beautiful day, the people we love.
And it's about expressing that gratitude too, right? Whether it's a heartfelt thank you to a colleague or just taking a moment to savor a beautiful sunset.
Exactly. And it's important to create space for everyone to express gratitude, to challenge those gender stereotypes that might discourage certain emotions. Like men are supposed to be stoic, women are supposed to be overly emotional. It's about letting everyone be authentic.
I'm all about that.
And while the ways we show gratitude might differ from culture to culture, that core act of recognizing and valuing the good in our lives, that's something that connects us all.
Okay, so we've gone through all 10 principles. And I have to say, I'm really struck by this approach. It's so much more flexible than a rigid set of rules.
It is, right. And the document doesn't just drop those principles and call it a day. It actually circles back to those initial important considerations, context, cultural differences, and developmental stages. But now we have this whole new framework for understanding them.
Right. Like now that we've talked about those principles, it's easier to see how they play out in different situations.
Exactly. Like the expanded point on context, it's like saying, hey, these principles are like a compass, not a map. The value, like respect stays the same, but how you show it, how you act it out, that changes based on the situation.
I like that analogy, a compass.
It's so spot on. And the point about cultural differences, it really hits home the fact that there are so many different ways to express those core values. The document gives the example of business negotiations, like how the process might be very different in different cultures, but the underlying goal of respecting each other, of reaching a fair agreement, that's still there.
Yeah. Or even something simple as food etiquette. What's considered polite at the dinner table can be so different around the world. But it's all about showing respect and appreciation for the meal and the people you're sharing it with.
Exactly. Different behaviors, same principle. And that final point about developmental stages, it highlights how our understanding of these principles deepens as we grow. Like fairness. A kid's idea of fairness is pretty basic. But as we get older, we start to grapple with those more complex questions of social justice, systemic inequality.
Right. And it's the same with those expectations about how we behave. Like, we might expect a toddler to have a hard time sitting still, but we wouldn't expect that from an adult.
Yeah.
It's all tied to development.
For sure. So I think the big takeaway here for our listeners is this. Trying to create a universal set of social rules is basically impossible. Context matters, culture matters, and where we are in our own development matters too. But those core principles, respect, honesty, kindness, responsibility, fairness, those are the things that can guide us, no matter who we are or where we are in life.
I'm really glad we had this conversation. It's given me a lot to think about. And I think it's super relevant to, well, everything that's going on in the world right now.
Oh, absolutely. And speaking of relevant, here's a thought for our listeners to chew on. Thinking back to all the principles we've discussed, is there a social rule or expectation that you've always found confusing? Maybe something that just doesn't seem to fit with those deeper values?
That's a great question. I'm curious to hear what people come up with. And maybe this is something to consider too. How can understanding these principles help us navigate a world that's becoming more and more diverse? And as we develop increasingly sophisticated AI, how can these principles guide us in teaching machines to interact in a way that's, well, that's
They're good questions, important questions.
And ones that we'll probably be grappling with for a long time to come. Thanks so much for joining us on this deep dive, everyone.
Until next time.
This is DigitView.